When his wife asks for a divorce, a man runs to his friends for support, only to learn that the secret to their happiness is an open marriage. Splitsville, directed by Michael Angelo Covino, and stars himself, Kyle Marvin, Dakota Johnson, and Adria Arjona. So, Jeffrey, what do you think about Splitsville?
So Splitsville comes to us from these filmmakers who made this film called The Climb in 2019, which I really liked. Like, that film had this bracing desperation in its comedy that I think unveiled a layer of excessive neediness, like, of all humanity beneath the surface. And it's a film that prioritized discomfort over making the audience feel comfortable in their seats, which I'm always a huge fan of. It basically has a very similar plot, which is that the two best friends, one of the best friends starts sleeping with the other one's girlfriend or wife. And it focuses more on that friendship and how their codependence on one another is actually this, like, really naked, needy quality that was mined for humor in, I think, a really successful way. This film, while it does focus on the friendship, it also has these dueling relationships in it that are very much a part of the text here. I'd say that overall Splitsville is very well realized, or as you kind of said to me when we walked out of the theater, like, it's very conceptualized in a way. And it's a comedy with a European art house aesthetic that I think successfully weaves into its humor in some ways. Like, the background and the composition of this film is as much part of the humor as the dialogue is. And it's kind of interesting because the aesthetic and realization of the film is really, really great. It's sometimes at odds, I think, both successfully and unsuccessfully with the humor, which is a lot more broad. But at the same time, it does give us these set pieces and trains us to start looking in the background at things. Like, this is a really minor example, but early on in the film, there's this beach house that the richer couple owns that is all windows. And there's a scene where they're all just having this somewhat innocent but also somewhat tense conversation where their son is outside lighting off fireworks, and we're just seeing this in the background, little by little being assembled until all these fireworks start going off. And it's really good at training your eye, but also heightening the tension a little bit in addition to that. So I say that a lot of this is really successful, but I have this issue with it that I think it's just kind of hollow at its core. And it's not so much that it needs to say something. I'm just not sure that it weaves its humor into the characters as much as I would like. I think I come out of this movie saying people are desperate and sad and they don't know what they want. And that basically applies flatly to all four of our main characters instead of evaluating and giving some sort of backstory or personality to each character that could find its way into the humor and start affecting the plot lines. So that's my main issue with the film. And I would say it's a big issue, but at the same time, this is like a really enjoyable watch, and it's clear that a lot of intention and intelligence went into constructing this film.
I agree a lot. There's actually, you reminded me how that ties into something I'm going to say in a little bit with regards to a comparison film. On a first impression, I really did enjoy this movie. I thought the film decided right from the beginning that it was going to be this very chaotic, off-the-rails comedy about relationships and the oldest time saying the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And so in the end, I do agree that I don't think the movie has this very deep effect. Like, it doesn't foray enough into its themes, but because it sticks to its themes so specifically and this kind of spirit that it has, I felt very engaged through the runtime of the film. This movie does a really good job of setting up its tone in this opening scene, which is very reminiscent, and here's the comparison I'm going to make, to Lady Bird. So just like in Lady... I know it sounds odd.
I know. Your
comparisons always sound odd to you on a first...
comparisons are so weird. Okay. But okay, I understand there's cars, like, things happen. Yeah, okay.
But just like in Lady Bird, we have this opening car scene where cohesion basically turns into chaos by way of our two main characters. In this case, we have Carrie and Ashley, a married couple, who are singing to a song in the car. Everything's great. Everything seems great between the two of them. And then at the end of this song, you see Ashley's like complexion change, and she tells Carrie that she wants a divorce. And that leads to this very humorous exit on Carrie's part from the vehicle, where he just starts running through the field away from the car, and starts our credit sequence where he's just running through all these different areas, grasslands, wetlands, woods, and he looks very shabby until he shows up at his friend's house.
Yeah, it's pretty absurd sequence now that I think back on it.
Yeah, and that's very reminiscent of Lady Bird. Lady Bird has the sequence where we're introduced to our main characters, we are highlighting the main tension of the film, And we're diffusing that tension by giving us examples of the type of humor that we're going to see displayed throughout the movie. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense now why I made that comparison. So I really like that this film just perfectly sets up this movie, what we can expect from it, and its running commitment to the joke, which will continue throughout the film, not just in this first sequence.
Definitely. I think that we're coming at this from two different perspectives because I saw their prior film, which I remember a good amount of, but I did have to go back to my Letterboxd review to give me like my overall impression of the film, and then some of its like sequence started coming back to me, but how I felt about it was very prominent, and I felt like this was so much in the same realm that it invited comparison to their first film that I thought was more successful, even though I think that film was better written. This film is like better executed, so it kind of depends like what you're looking for in film. I do think this is a much better directed film than that film is. Anyway, it just kind of goes to our different perspectives on the film.
Yeah, and that's what made me think of Lady Bird as well, is because I think what Lady Bird gets so right is the cohesion between its characters, their personalities, and its humor, because there's so much humor built into how the characters interact with each other and the things they choose to say to each other.
Definitely. I think actually the comparison brings out a lack in this movie.
Exactly my point.
I always say this about The Office, but like the show The Office, so much of the humor is rooted in like that character would so say that. Like that's usually like when you boil down the joke, that's usually what it's about. That's a really, I think, innovative, well, I don't want to say innovative, but a great way to incorporate humor into a film so that it's not only sight gags, whereas this movie is pretty much only sight gags, I would say. And it in that way, it reminds me of like a Ruben Östlund movie, which in my opinion is not really a compliment. But again, there's a lot in it that's really good and really funny, so I don't want to go too negative.
Yeah, the comedy is really about the visuals here, so I completely agree with you on that. From here, why don't we get into our characters and talk a little bit about the actors?
Sure.
So we have Kyle Marvin playing Carrie, and we have Adria Arjona playing Ashley. They're the married couple that I was talking about in that car sequence at the beginning. When Carrie runs up on his friends, Julie and Paul, played by Dakota Johnson and Michael Angelo Covino, we come to find out that their marriage is completely different. They have said they are in an open marriage. They go off and do what they want, and they still love each other. So all seems like fun and games until Carrie, as he's living there for a while because Ashley has kicked him out of the house, it's not as pretty as it seems, and we see the cracks.
I've talked about the book Transit by Rachel Cusk on the channel before. I can't remember what I mentioned it in regards to, but there's 3 books in that trilogy that follow the same character, and I'm reading the last book right now. And she had a conversation with somebody. I literally read this yesterday, but it ended up dovetailing into this film in a really interesting way where she confessed that her and her husband, every time a friend couple of theirs would fall apart or get divorced, that they would feel this secret superiority in listening to the other people's problems. So these couples would come to them, they would talk about their problems, and then this couple would be stronger for their egotism. But their marriage ended up falling apart too later in the story. And that actually is like a subtle part of this film too, because I think that a lot of the relationships have this air of stability and they think that they are very stable when really they're as fragile as the relationships they just left. So that's a really interesting tidbit here.
Yeah, I'll get into that in a little bit in terms of my overall thoughts on the movie because that will tie in very nicely. But as far as the actors go here, you know, we have Kyle Marvin playing Carrie, and Carrie is like this very dopey, innocent type guy. And in this conversation in the car, we find out that he wants to have a kid. He wants to have a baby, and she is not there yet. I think that discrepancy is part of the reason why she immediately comes out and she reads this note, and he can't even deal with finishing the rest of the note. But
it's also following the most awkward roadhead scene I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
God, that was awful.
Yes.
That was like
just
cringing. Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot of this movie though, is the feeling of cringe and a lot of the sequences. But
100%.
anyways, so we get the impression that these two characters, they're just on entirely different pages. They're not like he wants to move on with the relationship and she's not ready to do that. And she cheated, so she wants to see other people and she wants to have fun. This is also very hilarious because during that sequence with the car going, that we find out he has a gigantic penis.
Never mind.
What?
I just feel inadequate with all these penises on screen. I don't know. Like, does everyone in the world have a gigantic penis?
No, I think
they're prosthetics.
They just made it out to be gigantic.
It's so big.
I think that's part of the joke in a way, because it's like society teaches us that they care about the length of a penis and that would lead to better sex. So I think it's ironic that he has a big penis because she is unhappy with their sex life and she needs to seek things outside of it.
I see.
So I think that's the point of a giant penis.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But then we have Dakota Johnson and Michael Angelo Covino playing Julie and Paul. And Julie is somebody who's seems like very attached to home life. She does her pottery, she raises the kid, and her husband Paul, he's just kind of always gone. And she thinks he's out in the city just having tons of sex. So he's saying he has all this business going on, and we find out a little bit later what all that is actually about. But in this moment, he's constantly leaving. He's never around.
Yeah, I want to say, too, that I've been critical of Dakota Johnson in the past, but I think she's really good in this movie. Like, she has this really impenetrable, like, remove style where she's really hard to interpret, and I think that iciness and that cold resolve that she has as an actress worked really well in this movie. Like, she was almost the most believable character to me because her emotions seem so detached from her actions. I've had this issue with her acting in other films, like in Materialists, that didn't quite work for me, but I think it was the root of a lot of the humor here with her character.
I was actually going to ask you that question because I thought she was really good, and I think
I do too, yeah.
And I think she absolved some of the discrepancies you had with her acting in other roles.
I don't know how versatile of an actress she is, but it shows that with the right script, her style can really work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on that note, when we were talking about Materialists, we talked about how these actors, I was saying how they were kind of like too big for this film, that they didn't really feel like they melded into the film quite as much. Like, this film, you believe, I think, all of them and their existence in this movie. Like, you don't feel like they're out of place. Like, we were talking about Kate McKinnon feeling so out of place recently, and why you're blanking about
the Roses.
Movie, right? The Roses.
Yeah.
Literally just that.
So I think going back to some of how the jokes are fit into the aesthetic and like the overall visual realization of the movie, which it's really expert at. So there's this really brilliantly choreographed fight scene between Carrie and Paul, and it seemingly goes on forever. It's almost like one of those jokes that it becomes funnier because of how continually absurd it becomes and how it just continues to go. The visual cues in the scene are just really terrific and I think really artful. There is one portion where it's just a still shot of stairs and we see glass starting to fall on the stairs. So they're clearly doing something upstairs, fighting that is breaking stuff and all the glass, and then people are falling down the stairs. That's only one part of this sequence, which goes on for, I don't know, maybe 8 minutes or so. This whole really funny sequence with saving goldfish. One stings him, and he's like, oh, that one's a bastard. Just like, leave that one. Anyway, this was my favorite scene in the movie because I felt like it was the most fully realized in terms of letting the visual aesthetic really guide us with the humor. And I thought it really owned it in this sequence. The film does have a lot of other visual cues and visual humor throughout the film, but they're never quite as successful as this sequence was, which I thought was just pure like cinema, just great stuff.
I could not agree more. This fight sequence is filled with so much personality, and not just personality in the way it's designed, but the way our characters and their personal personalities fit into it. Because here we have these like two goofy dudes that like really do not know how to fight. And so, but they're also navigating their friendship and fighting while being friends. So there's this funny thing related to that with knives, and there's funny thing related to that with the fish.
They destroy all this great furniture and then they have to sit at the table later. And it's this great reveal because they do close-ups during the conversation and then it's a long shot and you realize they're talking at this destroyed table. It's really good stuff in that sequence. This is one of those movies that I'm not sure that I'm ever going to watch this movie again, but I will totally watch the fight scene again on YouTube.
And speaking of these choreographed and orchestrated sequences, we have another one that was really great, which is this long one take that plays out in Carrie and Ashley's house that it kind of spins around all the rooms of a house and it's changing through time. We see the lighting change in the room. We see characters enter a scene and then leave it only to appear in different clothing like moments later. So it was just a really good little montage that shows us the passing of time, but also all these men that Ashley is hooking up that have invaded their home. Carrie has made friends with all of them. It's a really good running gag, I would say. But like Carrie makes friends with all of them, and then he's helping them with all their problems.
They're all really charming.
Yeah, they all feel really well into this movie. I don't want to get into them individually because it'd just take forever, but all of them as a group, like every single one of them had their little personality trait that just fit really well into the film and the humor of it.
Yeah, definitely.
So from here, I think it would be great to get into some spoilers on the film, talk about the overall themes in more detail. So if you have not seen Splitsville, recommend checking it out unless you don't mind being spoiled. Otherwise, come back to this review at this point. So I want to talk a little bit about the details in this film because you mentioned it earlier. There's a lot of little things happening in the background, and those fireworks were just one particular thing. The film handles the details in a way that I think really complements the viewer's intelligence. It has them just slightly in the background where it's a blink and you miss it moment, but it really has to do with the narrative of the film as well as the humor. There's a few things I want to, like a few moments that I kind of just want to talk about in particular. There's a specific scene where Julie and Paul's son gets reprimanded at school for accidentally breaking another student's arm. We come to find out in this scene that he was pantsed earlier in the day, and so he accidentally broke his arm when he was trying to pants him back because all the kids were making fun of him for being pantsed earlier in the day. So I don't know if you remember, but scenes earlier, we are dropping him off at school, and Dakota Johnson's character and Kyle Marvin's character are having a conversation in their car. But then when they're driving off, we see, we're just passing kids through the car window. We're just seeing all these different kids. And towards the end, we see him being pantsed.
Oh, I completely missed that.
And this happens scenes beforehand.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
So I just liked that it's not spoon feeding you these jokes. It's having them just slightly under the surface. And there's a scene very similar to this when Julie kicks out Paul, and then Paul goes over Carrie's house, and he's telling him that Julie kicked him out. Everything's a mess. His cards were frozen, and he's not explaining exactly what's happened yet. But in this particular statement, Carrie's like, I can give you, I can let you borrow some money. And he's like, I've already borrowed too much money. And it's not until scenes later that we find out that he didn't really give the whole story, that he over leveraged his entire business. This is something that Julie has to say after the fact.
I could have read this wrong, but he made it sound like he's like, no, all my stuff is frozen. He almost made it sound like she did it.
Yeah. That's the way it kind of comes across. But that one particular moment where he's like, I borrowed too much money. I clocked that, and I was like, something's not right here.
No, I'm glad you're here because I completely missed that pantsing thing. No, that's great stuff.
Oh, another thing to do with that pantsing thing. There's a moment when Carrie and the kid are sitting outside on a bench, and the kid is talking about how he thinks his parents are getting divorced because he saw somebody else's New Balance shoes in his mom's bedroom.
Oh, that's hysterical.
And
yeah,
so,
that was good.
Yeah, we go to a wide scene, and then you see Carrie slightly tuck his feet, and he's wearing the New Balance shoes like under the little seat that they're sitting on. There's a lot of little details in which if you just pay attention, you'll see them.
While we're in spoilers, I want to talk about the message of this film quickly, or maybe it's like lack of message. So I was talking about how The Climb had this very clear message about dependence and desperation. And I guess the message of this movie is that people are flighty and things are transient. As the son says towards the end of this movie, you don't know the value of something until you sink it. So I think that's definitely part of what's going on here. But I think that just assigning this trait to 4 characters indiscriminately is the film's real fatal flaw. And I know I talked about that earlier, but I came out of the theater just thinking of the listlessness of the film. And I know that that's part of the point. The film is embodying the lack of concrete design within our characters' lives, right? But even so, by making that choice, I do feel like something is fundamentally lost because I come out of this film just thinking, okay, these characters are hypocrites and sad sacks and perennially dissatisfied with what's in front of them. And what did I really learn here? I don't know. Not that I need to learn something. I just wish that the message of the film wasn't as hollowed out or disregarded as it was, because there's a lot of really great individual stuff here, scene by scene, really, really good. It's just when you think about the movie on a whole, some of it is kind of strange. We didn't even talk about Nicholas Braun shows up for a little bit as a mentalist. He adds a lot of really cool humor to this movie. A lot of the time when I'm laughing at something, I'm laughing at the recognition of something that's totally true and maybe uncommonly talked about. And I don't think that this movie is quite as piercing with that as I would have liked.
To me, it didn't hit me as poorly as it hit you. I do agree that I think it's a little slight in the way it's diving into its themes. It doesn't really get too deep into this whole thing. The metaphor is kind of very simplistic and just overarching.
Yeah.
But I did like that the film really stuck to this message and also was just yeah, we're just all chaotic messes.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of being human in a way. And I just like that the film deals with that reality with such humor and lightheartedness. So for me, it was kind of basic, but at the same time, I didn't mind it at all.
So are you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I give the film a B+. I really enjoyed it. I do agree. I think when you had said that I probably won't revisit this movie, I do think this is a movie that might leave my brain in maybe a couple years and I might forget it. But at the same time, there's some really great sequences in here. We talked about the fight scene, the revolving montage sequence in the house, which was really well done. So there was a lot of things conceptually that this film was doing that were just, innovative. It didn't just do the bare minimum here, I think. It actually tried to be something more than that. I don't think we've seen a story much like this. Well, I haven't, but you said the last film was kind of very similar to this.
Yeah.
Maybe it's them just kind of noticing the flaws in their first film and realizing that they can conceptualize something a little better.
This is definitely more ambitious of a film. That was a much smaller film, their first one. This movie is getting a wide release, so this is, I think, more of a chance for these filmmakers to make an impression on, a wider audience. I'm going to give the film a B-, which is interesting because I did really enjoy the film. I just think that all of its individual scenes are really good. I'm just not sure that they tie together in the most perfect way. And I also think that their talent as directors, like that clear artistry that they have in their visual execution, overshadows some of the writing, which I found to be a little broad, but not the worst thing in the world. I really enjoyed myself. I know I made the Ruben Östlund comparison before, but in that way, it actually reminds me of his film The Square, which won the Palme d'Or maybe like a decade or so ago. There's a lot of visual gags in that movie too that are really like expertly executed in such like an interesting way, but I didn't love the script there either. So it's like a 1-to-1 comparison for me in that way. But again, I would recommend the film, and I know it's a Neon release. It's going to be on Hulu at some point. This is a movie that could totally pop on Hulu, and I think it would be a funny surprise for many of our viewers.
All right, so that's our review of Splitsville. Splitsville is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this movie? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.